Seahawks fans, wherever you may be, welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, Seahawks fans, welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers here for our midweek show, volume 3 of the 2022 regular season. Keith, welcome in, man.
Yeah, so interesting show this week. We've been talking so much about the rookie tackles and Tariq Woolen. We've kind of forgotten about the 2 second-round picks. And both of them, look to be playing more as the season progresses. So the idea here is we're going to kind of break down what we've seen, what we haven't seen, what we want to see from defensive end, outside linebacker Boye Mafe and running back Ken Walker III.
Yeah, so it'll be a fun conversation today. Those guys, like you said, primed to get more playing time. Pete Carroll's come out and actually said as much, especially with the linebacker Boye Mafe. Really excited to see that, and then we have expectations to see more of Ken Walker as time goes on as well.
Pete Carroll mentioned that and said that they're going to increase his workload slowly as they see more, and he calms down a little bit.
Yeah, cool. So Seahawks news really quick. Seahawks place running back Travis Homer on injured reserve, and Pete indicated that he might be out longer than the 4-week minimum. So just something to monitor there. They signed cornerback Xavier Crawford to the 53-man roster as a opening came up, and then also signed Cullen Gillespie, the fullback, to the practice squad. He's played in 38 NFL games, mostly on special teams prior to this. And that's really kind of it so far. Pete did give up some updates to the injury report, I guess, early in the week. And it looks like Shelby Harris might be ready to go this week, although he's not practicing today. He could be available, and that's up to a game time decision. Other than that, everyone else seems to be fairly well, healthy, and ready to go in this game coming up. You mentioned the idea of focusing on a couple of players. You're right. We've been talking about Charles Cross and Abe Lucas almost every week, and those guys have been making us talk about them. And Tariq Woolen is another guy that we've just kind of spent a lot of time talking about. And there's a reason.
For good reason, yeah. I mean, those guys have been playing great.
Absolutely. And there's a reason why we haven't been talking about Boye Mafe and Ken Walker. Boye Mafe just hasn't seen a lot of the field. I think he took 18 snaps in this last game. And he's just one of those guys that makes you wonder what the coaches are seeing in practice and stuff, because when he gets on the field, all he does is make plays. He makes himself known. He's present. He's showing up. He's defending the run really well, which nobody else seems to be doing. And so it just seems obvious that they would want to go to a player like that. And I realize going in, his reputation was that he wasn't ready. He needed help, especially setting the edge and defending the run. He just hadn't had that much experience at Minnesota prior to being drafted this April in doing that. But I think that with his athleticism and his size, he's got the ability to do that. He just needs to be coached up and get the reps. And I think that's what Pete Carroll alluded to in the press conference, where he said, Boye Mafe is going to start getting the reps, Keith.
Yeah, and he's earned them. I mean, he's only got 7 tackles, but he does have a sack. And the Seahawks have had a hard time getting to the quarterback, and he's a guy that in very limited opportunities has shown that he can do that. But on top of that, what you were saying, the guy he's going to be replacing is Darrell Taylor, who's been just a massive disappointment this year. Mafe's got an opportunity to basically take his job, because if he can play the run, then he's going to be better.
Why take him off the field then? And he's
Yeah,
got all the
because
upside with rushing the passer already built in. If he can defend the run
mhm.
better than Darrell Taylor, and the indications are maybe that would be true. How
Well,
does
yeah,
Darrell
because
Taylor get back on the field?
yeah, Darrell Taylor is going to have to figure it out and get better against the run, because he hasn't been great in pass rush, which is weird because he was like really good for it last year, and then struggled. Basically, it's like he's not even out there on running plays. So it's been bad for Darrell Taylor. So
These
I
two
think
players are kind of interesting.
I
You know,
think
they've had
Darrell
different
Taylor's out of
trajectories.
positions. I think Darrell
Yeah.
Taylor's out of position. He is a guy that needs to be up on the line. He's a defensive end, and they're trying to turn him
So
into an
he's a
outside
five. He's a
linebacker.
4.35 tech, is what you're saying?
No, he's a 4.37 tech.
Okay, so Leo guy.
Yeah. He needs to be up as a defensive end and have his hand on the ground, where he's not moving backwards. He's not in space. He's attacking upfield, whether that be rushing the passer or just setting the edge and doing that against the run. But he's doing that by getting upfield and making all runs go inside, rather than trying to do that from the outside, off the line of scrimmage, and come up and make those plays. It just doesn't seem to be working for him.
Is it a matter of just lateral quickness or just confidence?
Just confidence, mostly, I think. I mean, his back pedal's not what you'd want it to be, but laterally, he's looked okay. It's just, I think it's just
Like
a
the prime
combination of
example that
confidence and lack of instinct.
the prime example that's coming into my mind is the play against Deebo Samuel. You
Oh
know,
God,
and
that was awful.
it's almost like he was just frozen and had the inability to either move forward or move laterally, and he just kind of got stuck in a spot, and Deebo just really didn't even have to run past him very hard. He just, one juke and he was gone. I was going to talk about the trajectory of Boye Mafe versus Darrell Taylor. It seemed like Darrell Taylor developed really early. He was kind of a ready-made guy. By the time he got to his junior year in college, he was being very effective and being looked at as being a high-end type of draft pick. Got a little injured there at the end. Wasn't able to do all the senior stuff at the end there, and the Senior Bowl and the combine and stuff, and kind of lost some luster. But Boye Mafe was kind of the opposite. Really didn't develop in college very much. In fact, he only started 12 games overall, and those came in his senior year, and he just kind of was the second team in his conference and not widely looked at, and then shows up at the Senior Bowl and just kind of explodes. Here's this massively athletic guy with great size and agility, and ended up being the player of the game in that game. Had a great week in practice and just kind of lit it up, and rose up the draft boards as a result. And so everyone's kind of got this idea that he's underdeveloped. He's still has a lot to learn. He's doesn't know how to set the edge at all because he never really had to at Minnesota. And here's a player that the Seahawks have, and they're really excited to have him. And now here's his opportunity early on in his rookie season to kind of have an impact. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and with Taylor, like it's frustrating because he missed his first year, and then last year he looked good. Like
Yes, he
they were
did.
still in playing a 4-3, and he got to be that guy on the outside. He was that 7 tech, and he had 6.5 sacks, and it looked like, all right, this guy's ready to break out and explode this year. But the switch to the 3-4 isn't doing him any favors.
And it's not doing the Seahawks any favors either, obviously. I think, we can pause it a little bit talking about the players for a second and just talk about the scheme and the idea that Pete Carroll, there's a lot of chatter, if you will, on Twitter and other social media platforms about it's just the same old Pete. It's the same problems. It's the defense hasn't. Well, to be completely honest, Pete went
Yeah, I don't
out
agree with that.
in February and completely fired his entire defensive coaching staff and went to a completely new scheme with new terminology, Vic Fangio's defense. and brought in Clint Hurt, who had been with the team but has past experience in that defense, and then brought in Sean Desai and some of the Carl Scott, some of the other guys to come in and effectively completely wholesale change that thing. So it's inherently not exactly the same problems we're seeing in the prior 2 years that we had slow starts on the defensive side of the ball. Yeah. But it does make you wonder, like, what is going on?
Well, part of it is whenever a team makes a switch from a 3-4 to a 4-3 or the other direction, it takes a full year to get personnel right, because you've got guys that were drafted to play defensive end now trying to play outside linebacker. And they're not necessarily equipped to be an outside linebacker. And you've got guys that were drafted to, be a 5-tech and get up the field, that are now being asked to eat space, and that's maybe not their game. And so you end up with it taking a year to churn that part of the roster enough,
or 2 years,
the right
really.
kind of guys. Yeah. And so
two full cycles. You need your free agency cycle, you need your draft, and you got to go through 2 of those, I think, to really
so that's what I mean. They've been through the one. This year is going to be rough, and then we need a whole nother off season in order to get right as far as the players are concerned. And I think that is one of the things that we're running into here, is that Darrell Taylor isn't suited for this defense. And so this might be a situation where at the end of this season, they make a trade, or, they, like, next offseason, they make a trade and ship him off to a 4-3 team that can take advantage of his skills and get an asset, whether it be a, defensive end or, something else, or draft picks or whatever. I mean, that's something that we might see over this next year, because it just isn't a great fit for him.
And you mentioned just the front, defensive line guys there. He goes through the middle linebacker, the center of the defense, as well as the safeties and the defensive backs too. Everything is new. Everything is different. Those guys are kind of mostly old. I mean, we've turned over 25% of the defense, but 25 isn't quite enough, to be able to make wholesale changes and still expect to put your players in the best position to be successful. It's just, you're asking them to kind of play out of position a little bit, and it's a testament to the players to be able to do that. However, you're still going to have these issues, especially early on. Your terminology has changed. The players are in new positions, keying on different things that they've keyed on in the past, and it is a tough deal. So let's get back to Boye Mafe. 6'4", 261 pounds, ran a 4.53 40 at the combine, 38-inch vertical, super athletic. I mean, I know that you probably remember the Senior Bowl stuff, because we both came out of that kind of talking about this guy a little bit when we started doing the ramp up to the draft. He was one of those players that we were identifying that would be a good fit for Seattle.
Yeah, like the two guys that you and I both were like, as far as athletes are concerned, we really wanted on Seahawks roster were Boye Mafe and Tariq Woolen. And guess what?
Very true.
We got both, and both are proving to be pretty dang good. So
I'd like to see a little bit more of Boye Mafe before I put that out there.
Well, true, but I mean, in very limited snaps, he's looked good.
What did I just text you just a little while ago this afternoon?
The thing about Tariq Woolen?
Yeah, something like he's only allowing like 45 passer rating against him, 5th overall, all cornerbacks in the NFL after 3 weeks, which is just really an amazing stat.
Passer rating of 40.6 through 3 games.
It's an amazing testament to not only Tariq, but just the team. And I mean, and he made that starting. Kind of inserted into the starting lineup in training camp really early in the process. I know maybe it took an injury or whatever. Maybe I can't remember if it was
well, it was the
Artie Burns or Sidney Jones.
It was the Sidney Jones concussion that he took 3 weeks to get back for. Okay. And by the time he came back, like, Tariq Woolen kind of had the job.
And rightly so. I mean, he's got so much more upside and just every down potential than Jones does. Now, Jones is a fine corner. In fact, I would argue that sitting Jones or having him be a game day scratch is maybe not the best situation. But
no, he needs to be playing on the opposite side. He needs to be out there playing, and yeah, for him to be a healthy scratch, that unless he's just really not healthy, or the team is not liking what they're seeing from him in camp because he missed, or in practice because he missed all of camp, he needs to be playing. He needs to be out there, and hopefully we'll get that. We'll get to see him out there soon, opposite Tariq Woolen.
So super fast and athletic, both players that we're talking about here, and that's one of the things that we talked about. The defense really needing this offseason was speed, team speed, and athleticism, and just kind of changing the dynamic of the identity of the defense. It seemed like we were kind of soft, and Tariq Woolen gives us kind of the ability to kind of build around now. I mean, that's the kind of player you kind of build a back end of a defense around, and so it should be pretty exciting going forward.
He seems to be the type of player you build a scheme around. Like the way that the Seahawks operated when Richard Sherman was out there, and you could roll coverage away from him because you just know he's going to be all right.
Yeah.
Now he's not there yet.
True, but I've been so surprised, Keith, that they've left him on an island quite frequently, actually.
Yeah, but I like to see he's not at that level yet, but you can see it coming. I mean, the guy's had 3 games in the NFL. And he's already looking like he is a 3-year vet.
Here we are, not even supposed to be talking about him. We can't help ourselves.
Yeah. So Boye Mafe. But the thing is that we're talking about him because he was a guy who looked to be a bit of a project, but there was so much athleticism, so much like physical talent that you knew that it wouldn't take much for him to get through the mental part and get on the field. And Boye Mafe is the same way. 263-pound outside linebacker. This guy's big,
yes,
for that spot, but he's so athletic. Like he doesn't run like a big guy out there. He runs like the 225, 230-pound outside linebacker that you'll see on other teams. He runs like that,
and he's got an 82-inch wingspan.
Yeah.
He's only 6'4", but he's got that wingspan, and then he's got the 5'4", 340. Reportedly ran a 4.49 40 at not his pro day, but some other event earlier in his career. It might have been a Nike deal because he was on Bruce Feldman's freak list at number 7 overall before this draft.
Yeah, and
so he's that
kind of guy.
He benches like I think he had 32 reps or something like that, and then he
that's crazy for a non-lineman.
He cleaned like 400-pound something like a crazy amount of reps and stuff.
So we need to see him out there. We need to get an idea of playing a linebacker. There's so many different things you have to key on and recognize and read and make sure you get into the right spot and then do the right thing. It's a harder position, but
yeah, and then coverage though too. We haven't even seen him in coverage really.
Yeah. From what we've seen so far is we know he's got the physical skills. Now let's go see the rest. Can they develop him the way they developed Woolen?
And the reason that I think that we're talking about this, Keith, and we're excited about it is because the defense is so cruddy, to use a nice word, that I think we've reached a point, even in game 4 now, approaching game 4, we've reached a point where we're now talking about the future. We're talking about trying to identify future assets, the players that we need to carry forward after this year. We've got a lot of vets on the team. Some of those guys are just not doing the job. It's time to see what we have that we can build around. And Boye Mafe would be definitely one of those players.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's turn our attention to the offensive side of the ball. We've got a couple of players we're going to talk about, but the first one is rookie Ken Walker, the third, 5'9", 215 pounds, ran a 4.38 40. Very exciting player out of the draft. Second running back taken after Bryce Hall in the draft. Very explosive, elusive, powerful, good balance, all the things that you're looking for in a 3-down back. The only rub on him was that they didn't know if he could receive the ball out of the backfield very good because they just didn't do that at Michigan State. So far, he's looked great in that role for the Seahawks. And, he had that 21-yard scamper in the last game that showed kind of some burst and elusiveness and change of direction. And it really kind of makes you want to be able to see him as more of a featured back in this offense. I know Penny's there, and we're just don't seem to quite be in sync yet with our running game. But how do they work Ken Walker in more into the equation?
Well, what they need is to they need to just be better at running the ball in general. I mean, Penny's been decent in 2 of the 3 games. Like, he's been good in 2 of the 3 games. In the 49er game, nothing worked running the ball. But they need to be able to string together drives so that they just have more running plays total. Not by running a higher percentage, but just running more plays. And if that's the case, then we'll see more Walker. And I think we'll see more Walker anyway. If you listen to Pete Carroll talk, he said that that with Walker, there was a little bit of like, he was a little jittery and a little like, basically he was just too ramped up and excited and wasn't being patient with the runs that he was being given until that 29-yarder. And they just need him to calm down and do what he does.
I think you get there by just feeding him the ball.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it is, you just let him go through the prep and the work, and then get out there and not have the lights be so bright. I think it's both. So
what I would like to see is, Penny's earned his right to be the starter. Go out there and have 2 or 3 series, but then give Ken Walker 2 or 3 series and just kind of see what he does. 3 series in a row. Give him an opportunity to catch, have 7 carries in a row would be great, or 10 even. How do we capture that thing that we had at the end of the last season? We had 5 or 6 games there where Penny had 700 yards, and it just seemed like we could run over anybody. I realized we had Britt at center and Brown over at left tackle, probably better run blockers than Cross there at left tackle currently. And then Austin Blythe at center, and then Gabe Jackson seems like he's dropped off a little bit. Is that the difference?
Yeah, they're struggling. The interior of the line is struggling. Lewis is not playing as well now as he did as a rookie, and that's been troubling. Austin Blythe is good as far as helping get the line calls right and all of that, and he's been okay as a pass blocker on most passing downs, but as a run blocker, he isn't that road grader. And I don't know what's going on with Jackson at right tackle. He was the team's best offensive lineman last year, and this is a Pro Bowl guy who played really well last year, and he just has not looked good so far.
And he's next to a competent center who knows all the line calls, makes good calls, and is fairly decent at pass blocking. And then Abe Lucas is everything you could ask for out of a rookie at right tackle, playing better than half the right tackles in the league already. And so there's no excuses for Gabe Jackson to have let down over there. He's not having to compensate for a lot. He's just not playing well on his individual assignments.
He's got more talent beside him this year than last year on both sides. Well, at least at tackle. Like, he's got more talent beside him, so he shouldn't be worrying about compensating for other people's mistakes.
Yeah,
he needs to just focus on his job, and if he's not going to get that done, well, then this is probably his last year in Seattle, and
it might be his last game. I'm not going to say it's his last game in Seattle. I'm saying it might be his last game as a starter if they decide to go with Curhan over there at right tackle. I think that would help improve their running game. Curhan's not going to give you as much as a pass blocker, but the interior pass blocking might not be as much of a concern with Geno as he's getting the ball out fairly quickly and doing the short passing game type stuff. And they still have Abe Lucas over there. But Abe Lucas plus Curhan gives you such a large push
Mhm.
forward. Abe Lucas has already shown that he's a better run blocker than given credit for in college. And I think that might be a nice duo to run behind. But that's just me. That's just me.
And with Lewis on the other side, if he's still hurt, because he was hurt for a bunch of training camp and into the first week, he missed the
High
first game
ankle.
of the year. If he's still hurt, then let Phil Haynes play, because we've seen him, and does he make mistakes? Sure, but he was a better run blocker than we've seen from any of the interior guys so far this year. So
yeah, and Lewis and Blythe have graded out consistently the two lowest graded blockers, and then Jackson right behind. So the middle of our line is what's hurting us, I think, as far as getting that, the push, defending the run coming in, and our running backs really kind of not having enough room initially, I think is kind of held us back a little bit. But we've also been able to kind of break off some chunk plays too, 8-yard runs. Penny's look pretty decent fighting for extra yards after contact and all that stuff. So it's not been a disaster. There just hasn't been a huge commitment. We've actually passed the ball, I would say 10 to 15% more than I thought we would this year. I mean, it's really been kind of interesting to me.
The Broncos sold out to stop the run, and so the Seahawks were just throwing it based on the defense, and they were behind big against the 49ers. So
and the 49ers have an underrated defense. They just do.
So the Seahawks were just trying to get back in the game, and you'd only do that by throwing the ball and speeding things up and all of that. So I don't think it's completely a situation where this is what they want. I just think that it's a matter of the way the game flow has gone, and it's gone away from them.
And just not being able to sustain drives or have enough drives. Our defense has been on the field for so long. That's part of it too, just not having the drives. So we were going to talk.
I would say this actually transitions really well into the other conversation that I'd like us to have, and that is to talk a little bit about Geno Smith and the offense and what the problems are, what's not working, and all of that, because it's easy for me to come in here and be like, yeah, I mean, he's clearly not the future. He's 34 and not a great player.
He's currently 31, Keith, and he'll be 32 October 10th.
Is he 31?
Yeah.
I thought he was 34.
You had me convinced, though. But I wanted to correct the record when I found
that actually, I mean, that's important, and I'm glad we're getting it right. I don't know where that came from. Then I thought he was older, but when you look at him, people will say he's not the biggest problem on offense. Yeah, that's true. He's not. He's not the biggest problem on offense. They've got other problems. They've got the interior of that offensive line that's really just not playing up to expectation. Not playing up to how any of those guys have played in the past. That's a bigger problem. And
so I think one of the questions that led to this actual conversation, when we finished recording our last show, I asked you this question. I said, "Why do we still need a franchise quarterback, Keith?
Because he isn't a franchise quarterback.
If he's playing to this level of competency and efficiency, he's got 77% of his passes completed, 717 yards. The 7.0 yards per attempt is unsettling a little bit. 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. That's not a horrible ratio, either. But it's not horrible. And then he's taken 6 sacks. But overall, he hasn't been the problem. In fact, you could argue he's kept us in a couple of these games. But answer my question, why do we still need a franchise quarterback?
Because you can't win without one, and he's not one.
What does he not give you that a franchise quarterback, quote unquote? Let's just use Wilson as an example.
He doesn't make the players around him better, and he doesn't give you an opportunity to go win a game when it's close late. He just isn't that guy. He's a guy that can be a caretaker of an offense and not turn the ball over, although he has 2 picks. One of them, I'm not going to give him too much credit for. It was 4th and 18 at the end of a game, and he was just trying to give the team a shot. But, if your defense is going to dominate and your offense just has to score a few points, you can win with a guy like Geno. But he isn't that guy who, with 2 minutes left, to get the ball down 4 is going to drive your team down for a score. We've seen that. We've seen him have those opportunities. He had 2 last year, and he's had a couple already this year, and he's failed at all of them because he's not that guy. So they do need a franchise quarterback. Is he the biggest problem on offense? No, he's not. He's actually played surprisingly well, but he's older. He's not your future, and he's not a guy. Geno Smith isn't the biggest problem, but he also isn't the answer to their problems.
Yeah, that's the quote I was looking for.
Russell Wilson covered up a lot of awful because he could. He played behind some of the worst offensive lines the NFL has seen the last couple of years. And his ability to escape, his ability to make plays, just play off schedule and just do those kind of things allowed for the team to be deficient in other areas. His ability to take the team down and score late in a game where they haven't played well and kind of didn't really deserve to win up until the last few minutes, but then he was able to elevate, and not just himself, but the guys around him.
So
that's what a franchise quarterback does.
Geno had a couple of those opportunities early in his career, 2013-14, when he was a rookie, second year, where he did have some comebacks. He had 5 come from behind wins under his belt at that point, including 2 in the last 2 minutes. He has that. He doesn't have a lot of opportunities and hasn't had. What if he would have shown you that here in the next 8 weeks, that 2 or 3, 4 games, they put the game on his shoulders at the end and he actually came out and did it? Would that change your perception of off-season need?
No, it wouldn't. Just because I mean,
does that say more about you, or does that say more about the actual on the ground situation?
I think it says more about the actual on the ground situation, because it's about evaluation of what you're seeing. And he does a lot of good things pre-snap. Like we were saying in the last show, he's learned that that's important because he didn't do that stuff early in his career, but he is doing it here, which is awesome. But what isn't working is all the time post-snap. That's why, he's had 2 good quarters out of 6. Because teams are able to adjust to what the Seahawks are doing, and Geno's limitations show up. And I just think that in the end, not all quarterbacks are built to be a superstar, and he's just one of them that's not. Like I said, he be steady and win you some games if the defense plays really well and the running game's going? Absolutely. Absolutely, he can. But is that going to win you a title? Those titles come once every 15 to 20 years. That's the Philadelphia Eagles with Nick Foles and the Trent Dilfer with the Ravens. Those are the last 2 instances of a guy winning a title being Geno Smith level. We've seen Jimmy Garoppolo make a Super Bowl and then was clearly part of the reason why they didn't win it. We've seen Jared Goff make it to a Super Bowl and then clearly was a big part of the reason why they didn't win it. And we've seen both of their teams recognize the fact that they weren't good enough and move on.
That right there is a really key point. I think, in this argument, because it is easy for fans to root for their quarterback, and
absolutely.
Geno's definitely an underdog. Everything's against him. He came out with a quote, "People have written me off, but I ain't right back." And he's just got kind of that dog mentality, which is great. You get behind that. You feel good about a guy like that. I do.
Yeah. I'm game. I think that what we're seeing from Geno Smith is way more than I expected coming into the year. I like what I've seen at times. That first half against the Broncos and the first half of this last game, he looked better than at any point he's looked in his career. This is a guy who was in control of the offense and all of that, and things were working. But then the defenses make a small adjustment, and you don't have a guy who you can adjust with. There's limitations, and then that's just part of the way it is. I mean,
and there's certain circumstances too that have come under his situation. You know, you've had some holding calls untimely. You've had
that happens to everyone, though.
True, but you know,
the idea that what you're just
he's also had some interceptions that have been dropped as well.
Yeah, he's had
potentially
some interceptions hit guys right in the breadbasket, and then they dropped them. But so you're like, oh, well, the holding calls, whatever. That happens to everyone. If you're not good enough to overcome that kind of stuff when it happens, then you're not good enough, and that's part of it.
Yeah.
Because
I agree. No, I agree with everything that you're saying, and I think
the rest of the team has to play perfectly, like the offense has to play perfectly for you to be successful and look like really good. That's a problem because no one's perfect, and you're gonna have guys miss blocks. You're gonna have guys get out of position and hold. It sucks. It happens.
It'd be really awesome if we could sit here and say Geno Smith's ceiling is 12 wins with a great defense. I don't believe that. That comes out of my mouth. I don't believe it. What I do believe, though, is Geno Smith could be a 500 quarterback with a great defense, because that's who he's been. That's what he looks like. He has the potential, depending on the way the ball bounces, to be more than that, but it's himself having the team on his shoulders. I don't know that he has that championship caliber, and I agree with you. You'd talked to me too, I think, after we pushed end on our last recording, about the importance, the differential positional importance between a franchise quarterback and the number one pass rusher in the draft, like a Will Anderson. I said, what if Seattle sucks like this on defense all year, and Geno shows that he's at least a competent placeholder? Do we switch directions as a franchise and go first pick overall on the defensive side of the ball? And you said, no, you go get your franchise quarterback.
Yeah, because if you can get a franchise quarterback, that'll cover up for a lot of things. You can get pass rushers with the whatever the Broncos pick ends up being, the 9th overall pick, and then or in the 2nd round. You can go get those guys. They may not be as dominant, but you can still get those guys. You can't get a franchise quarterback there. You only can get them at the top of the 1st round. And you look at Jadavian Clowney was thought of as being one of the best defensive end prospects that we've seen in the last 20 years. He didn't lead to more wins for Houston. He didn't lead to more wins when he was in Seattle, right? Myles Garrett, as good as he's been, and he's been very good, has he been a difference maker in Cleveland?
Yeah, you said, these guys are very, very good football players and the best players on their defense, but they're still bad defenses.
Yeah. Whereas when you have a franchise quarterback, you can have a bad offense that does well enough to win games. We saw that in Seattle, right? Where we had, not a great offensive line and no running back there for a couple of years when Marshawn left, but we had a franchise quarterback and the offense worked anyway. And they still won games. They still made it to the playoffs. They still contended. A quarterback can make that much of a difference to your team. A defensive end can be really good and like whatever, but they don't make the team better in the same way that a quarterback can.
I agree. Good points. Great points.
You're not supposed to agree with me. It makes for a
You
much more
you make
entertaining
way
show when you
this
when you
this
when
but
you
this
yell at
way
me.
makes way too much sense. I would look like a complete dork if I argued against that, because I mean, obviously that's the
Yeah.
way that this thing is looked upon, and 32 teams in the NFL agree with that, I think. And it'll be very interesting this next 3 or 4 weeks, Keith. We had talked about the Detroit game. First of all, we talked about the Atlanta game being kind of a barometer as far as where we're at. We lost to Atlanta at home, and we had a pretty decent, a really good offensive outing, and we lost. And now we're going on the road to Detroit. Here's another defense in Detroit that I think that we could probably move the ball on a little bit on offense. I expect similar results on offense, actually. But is our defense going to be able to slow down? Their offense looks really good, actually. They might be without a couple of their key players, and we'll see if that makes a difference. But after that, it gets more difficult. We've got a couple of games with Arizona coming up, and it's just and Kansas City, and it's just not going to be easy at all. And I'm not sure if this team's equipped to win those type of games against better opponents. It's just going to be one of those years where we're looking at individual player performances and so forth, like Boye Mafe and Ken Walker. So let's look at those guys and kind of root for those guys and see what we've got as we build this thing up. Because this is, like you said, this is a roster building exercise for the next couple of years, and
at least just for the next year.
And we're finding out who we're gonna keep, who we're gonna build around.
Because you got Tariq Woolen. I mean, he looks like a guy, a franchise piece. He's a guy that you can
2 tackles.
You contend with 2 offensive tackles. You got that. And that's all just in this draft. And what if, Boye Mafe and Ken Walker continue to develop and look good? That's a lot of pieces that you've put in place in one draft. And they just need to continue to do that. They need to continue to draft well and that kind of stuff. But they need those evaluations, and it's not just the evaluations of the rookies. It's evaluations on guys like Darrell Taylor. And they need to figure out if he is going to turn that corner and become the guy they thought he was going to be going into this year, or whether he's just a guy who should have his hand on the ground at a defensive end, and they need to go trade that asset for a player who fits the defense better.
So far, it looks like that. Yeah, we're going to find out.
You look at Pete Carroll's history, and one of the first things he did when he got here was trade Darrell Tapp for Chris Clemens. And that was a situation of trading a guy that was productive, and you knew he was, not a Pro Bowler, but a productive pass rusher, for a guy no one had heard of. But it was a guy that fit the defense better, and it was a better fit overall. And then, of course, Chris Clemens explodes in Seattle. And it's not like Tapp played poorly for the Eagles. He went on and continued to play well. But you got to get the right guys in especially when you change schemes like this. So they need to make those adjustments and move forward.
Good show, Keith. I enjoyed that conversation. That was great. Tomorrow we're going to come back and we're going to do a show on previewing the Seahawks at Detroit Lions this week, the 4th game of the season. After this game, Keith, we'll be nearly a quarter of the way through the season, which is remarkable.
Crazy.
Remarkable, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that'll be a good show as well. Come back for that. You can find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at NWC Hawk. The show is at Hawks Playbook on Twitter. Find us on your favorite podcast platforms and YouTube. Hit that subscribe button and make sure you share it. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NWC Hawk. Keith is at Myers NFL. And the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.